Leaders from the Economic Community of West African States, that's ECOWAS, have suspended Burkina Faso following a military coup on Monday. ECOWAS made the announcement yesterday, 5 days after mutinous soldiers forced democratically elected President Roch Kabore to resign. The military chiefs went on state television to announce the takeover, which they said was necessary in order to defeat armed militias. To talk more about this, we're joined by Africa analyst, Advocate Sipho Mandula. Advocate, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for being on News at Prime. Has ECOWAS gone far enough in dealing with the situation in Burkina Faso? Is a suspension of its membership enough?
Evening, Tembekile and Jumbo Africa to the viewers. Tembekile, looking or assessing what ECOWAS has done yesterday and with their delegation that is heading to Ouagadougou today and Monday, one can say that they have done enough, because what they have not done is to can impose sanctions that they've already imposed in Mali and Guinea-Conakry as the countries that have went through the coups in the past 18 months. But if you look at ECOWAS again, what is still lacking is the issue of instilling the issues of national dialogue, because it seems that the issue of pushing sanctions, suspending membership of member states within ECOWAS, it limits that room of engagement. And hence, I think if you look at ECOWAS, conditions are very clear. The safety of the head of state and ministers come first, which is shocking, Tembekile, because the safety of civilians must come primarily. Secondarily, it must be the safety of government leaders. But the challenge in Ouagadougou, again, stems from what has been going on for the past 5 years. And looking at the history of that country of military coups since 1960, that is a cause of concern about the regional organization. How do they grasp and understand these military coups? The same applies to the AU.
So just with that in mind then, Burkina Faso itself has experienced coups in the past. Why have the successive groups of leadership, including the recent President Roch Kabore, why have they not taken lessons from that? I mean, he's been toppled, according to the military, because of a failure to get control, get a handle of the security situation in the country.
Tembekile, let's look at this script. All the three countries that I've mentioned earlier, they've used that same reason of removing heads of state. And again, you have another element of the community, civil society pressure groups that have been raising the issues of corruption within the weak state, the issues of civilian and military relation. What is lacking here, it is beyond looking at Kabore. Remember that Kabore was the prime minister during the time of the exiled fugitive Blaise Compaoré. So if you look at the history of Ouagadougou, the main crisis, it is not the big man syndrome, but is the issue of even professionalization of the army. Is the military discipline enough to understand the consequences of these actions that they have taken? Because what it has done, it has opened a vacuum for the terrorists to get into Burkina Faso, to get into the neighboring countries. And that's how we should understand that the big man syndrome in African countries, it is even the failed Western democracy model that has been imposed either by the French, either by USA, either by the United Nations, because all these countries and foreign bodies, what they have done in the Sahel, they have caused a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of what are the principles and tenets of democracy, because you cannot have democracy in the midst of a violence and a civil war.
But the military leader, the coup leader at this point, who addressed people in Burkina Faso on television this week, said that what they're going to do now is tackle the issue of the security situation, and that was welcomed by some people in the population, were reading at least. That often happens where after the military seizes power, civilians welcome it because they are unhappy with the government, excuse me, for various other reasons. But it never seems to last, that goodwill, does it?
Correctly. Remember that the military, it is playing on the hands of the civilians here by saying even further. Damiba was saying that it is important to restore the civilian rule, but he's raising conditions once more. And if you will read the lines of the United Nations, they are reminding us of the 1999 epidemic of coups in Africa. Others are saying these are the tsunamis that are coming, that the military has appetite of power. And I'm now going back again to the same issue of what are the military skills, what is the military role in governance when you have generals who, most of them as well, they were not in the battlefield. But with this one of Ouagadougou, Damiba was on the battlefield. He do understand challenges that the military was facing since last year. And at the same time, Tembekile, my concern with most of these military junta leaders, they are being trained, they are being given education by the Western countries. Most of them, they've learned from France and USA, so they know to master how to overthrow a state.
And how should the military leadership then be trusted by ECOWAS and the civilian population when, to date, there's still no clarity on where President Roch Kabore is and some of the other officials from the government who were detained in the hours that the coup was unfolding?
Correctly, we are working with voiceless and faceless sources that will tell you that President Kabore is under house arrest. If you remember, even in Guinea-Conakry, Alpha Conde was kept under house arrest until he was only recently been given access to have medical attention. But if you look at the military conduct, the bloody coup of 1987 that removed Sankara was the one which was very brutal and bloody. But if you look at this one, there was tension on Sunday. Only on Monday that Kabore was handed over to a presidential villa under house arrest, and for him to sign a resignation letter. So one can look at that. The challenge is where I said ECOWAS is worried about the safety of the head of state and the ministers. But what is critical is the responsibility to protect. That must include the civilians. And like you are saying, deficit of trust will always be questioned. Like, you know that the civil society on Friday pleaded with ECOWAS on the sanctions, pleaded with ECOWAS on restoration of constitutional rule. So those are the aspects that the challenge with ECOWAS now, Tembekile, is that ECOWAS have been found wanting because it seems that they are trying to use the UN Security Council as a way of imposing sanctions to these countries.
With that in mind, how much bargaining power does ECOWAS have going into Burkina Faso, given that, as you said, this is the third coup in that region in a space of 18 months when you consider developments in Mali and most recently Guinea?
Tembekile, if I was part of the entourage of the defense ministers, I would say I have a clue of what they will be saying today. Others are saying it's a pressure to Damiba, the head of the military junta in Ouagadougou, ahead of the ministerial meeting on Monday. On Thursday, there's another summit of ECOWAS where they will be assessing these two missions to say we have sent a delegation on Saturday, which is the military chiefs. On Monday, we've got the envoys who can try to, and the issue of the electoral calendar should not be at the core. You know, the issue that I'm raising earlier is to review and relearn our Western democracy principles. Are they working for us? The role of the foreign military groups that are in the Sahel, from the Russians to the French, to the Belgians, to the Danish. Why are we still having foreign military groups in the Sahel region? Is it because of the natural resources that these countries are now having? Partly yes. But like I'm saying, Tembekile, the mission of ECOWAS must be to still push the issues of national dialogue, to strengthen, to push the rebel groups in the neighboring borders of Niger, Chad, as well as Ouagadougou. Because the problem of ECOWAS is that it doesn't have the standby force that can chase the military, the terrorists. The only power they are having is this political and economic imposition to these struggling countries.
Advocate Sipho Mandula, good to speak to you. Advocate Mandula is an Africa analyst speaking to us about developments in Burkina Faso.